surrounding neighbors of the site. And like to introduce on my team, myself, Edwin Gaskin, and my colleagues, Randy Cosby and Andy Beach, who are also here. And we're really here to answer questions that you all may have and hear concerns and ideas. I know a lot of you have responded to city staff with a variety of communications. We appreciate that. We've only just recently seen those, so we haven't really had time to process all that. But really going through it, and welcome to Councilman Ziegler here again, and of course city staff as well. I guess what we can do really quickly is roll through the same PowerPoint that we presented before. I'm having technical issues today, so we're going to try to have Randy Cosby present it and me speak. We're not exactly sure if that's going to work. And if not, Randy will take over the audio as well. So.
All right, let me see if I can get this up on the screen here.
Oh, you're muted.
Randy. Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Randy.
Okay. All right, let's see.
All right. So just starting at the beginning, welcome, just like we said. And we're going to be talking about the 350 Spotswood Drive parcel. I think everybody's familiar where that's at now. It's particularly the folks on this call, it's 3.2 acres. What we're proposing is 150 units of new construction, market rate multifamily, stick built and surface parked. We all acknowledge that it's a tight site. Parking will be the limiting factor. We have proffered with the city to limit the unit size and type to a maximum of 20% two-bedroom units. So the vast majority will be one bedrooms with some studios as well. As part of this, we're working with the city and the community table in Rah-Rah to figure out a relocation strategy. And you can see that we've offered $350,000 for that site as it sits. Just to give you an idea kind of what the massing looks like on the project scale that we're talking about. These are 4-story products here. I wouldn't pay too much mind to the actual facades or the skins, as they say. This is more to just give you an idea as to the scale of the property in relation to people and vehicles. So what we do as a team is we focus a lot on infill sites, particularly sites that are underutilized. We are owner developers. We invest in sites with that in mind, and I think there's a distinct advantage with us being owner developers, striving to make investments that make for a better long-term neighbor. We partnered on this proposal with UrbanCore Construction. You can go ahead, Randy, to the next one. UrbanCore is a Richmond-based group, and they've done a lot of ground-up new construction, award-winning projects. What we like about them is, though they're a contractor, they think a lot like a developer in that they invest really in processes and planning, and their team as well. I've been doing this development stuff for almost 20 years now, and I'm never as good as the field superintendent on the ground is. So it's really important that the Echelon and the UrbanCore teams have a field team in Lexington that exceeds our expectations for the project to be successful. So why do we focus on these kind of sites? Well, we try to have an additive effect where the sites where we invest in not only garner an investment right there, but appreciate the value of the assets around it. Typically sites like this that are redeveloped produce, of course, new taxes, new jobs, and new residents. But our overall goal here is long-term to have a high quality space. That's our goal. And what do we like about the Spotswood site? It's probably the same things that the neighbors that are on the Zoom call like about it. It's well located, very close in terms of connectivity. walking, biking, short drive from just about anywhere you'd want to go in Lexington. It's a tranquil setting. And of course, Lexington itself is a regional draw. We've been attracted to Lexington for many years now. Why we think this product suits the site is that we think a housing strategy makes sense for the site. We think Lexington has better positioned commercial corridors for retail success. We don't believe this is the right spot for retail or particularly even office. Why does housing matter? Housing is not going to solve all the world's problems, but it's an important part of what a community can offer, both to prospective employers and more importantly, their employees. And also a diverse housing mix allows folks to grow within a community. Start off at the early parts of their careers in a particular type of housing product and then transition to other types of housing products as they age and their economics and their needs change. Our goal here is to create a maintenance-free environment on this site. And we believe the site is very well positioned. The rescue squad building is obsolete and deteriorating. We, in our particular business model, don't have a use for it. So that would be demolished under our plan. The site has underground and above ground utility locations that are challenging, but we've started to frame up how those can be solved. And we're talking about a 4 to 5 story market rate residential complex. Again, speaking of the overall team that we have, these are the kinds of projects that we have touched collectively, if you will, in terms of involvement and experience. And you can see they vary wildly in terms of project size, both smaller and larger than what we're proposing here on the Spotswood parcel. I'm sure you've seen this before. This has been circulated. This is a very, very rough draft of how this site may lay out. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a faint red line showing the zoning setback that we've estimated off the parcel boundaries. Currently, we have 2 separate buildings and the parking drawn in off of Spotswood and pulled to the rear of the site. So it's less obvious from Spotswood and creates more of an adjacency with the parking that's to the southeast. So this, again, is just a community meeting that we've had. It's now a series of 4, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. So, Randy, if you could unshare, we'll get to the dialogue and questions. Happy to answer any questions or field any comments. At this time, really the rest of the time is yours.
How you doing there? This is Jamie Joyner. I'm a resident of Taylor Street, which is in close proximity to the structure. I have a question. Specifically, you mentioned this is going to bring new jobs to the area. Can you speak more to what you plan to employ to run this facility?
Great, and thanks for joining us, Jamie. When we talk about new jobs, the facility itself won't generate but a modest number of jobs. A project like this may generate 2 to 3 property management type jobs. There'll be plenty of indirect economic benefits in terms of contracts for maintenance and landscaping. But our intention isn't to communicate that our facility itself will generate jobs. What I was attempting to communicate was that it helps support employers in the area. At least this is what we found in other communities when we've developed market rate housing that's really designed towards professionals. What we're doing is really trying to dovetail with the needs of area employers to help with frankly, their recruitment. particularly a market like Lexington that has a pretty tight real estate market and a fairly expensive one. We're just one more offering for folks that may be coming to the area for more of a transitional time in their career. Just to give a couple of examples of how it's worked in other communities, we've partnered with a lot of school systems to help in their teacher recruitment efforts. We've also partnered with large manufacturers in the area, in the respective areas, to help identify transitional housing for executives and engineers that may be in the area just for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. But again, most of this is geared towards people that aren't going to buy a house, that are really there more transitional. I hope that makes sense. Jamie, did you have any follow-up questions there?
Yeah, it does. I think, one of your points there was to talk about reinvigorating a community. I happen to live in that community and have seen multiple people renovating houses that exist that are single family dwellings that surround this entire property. And you're talking about a transient type rental community. And I'm not sure when the last time you visited Lexington was, but your proposed scale for this project seems to be that it'd be one of the largest structures within the city limits. And I'm struggling to see how that fits within the size of the structure or the scale of the lot that we have here that the city owns. Most of your projects look like they were in the Richmond area. Is that correct?
Yeah, most comparable projects to this would be in the Richmond area. Yes.
Yeah, and I happen to have a family member who owns a substantial amount of rental property in Lexington, and had some open discussions with them about his ability to retain tenants within the city limits. And I'm curious as to where the jobs are to create these 150 tenants or potential tenants for your facility, or have you studied the rental market, and where do you anticipate these 150 families are going to come from in order to take up residence in Lexington?
Well, there was a host of questions in there. I guess to answer your question, I was in Lexington a few weeks ago, so I'm fairly familiar with Lexington. I've been there frequently over the last several years. Certainly not as familiar with it as you are, I'm sure, being a resident there. And in terms of scale, you have hit sort of the nail on the head. Being adjacent to single family residence, this is going to, the massing is going to be very distinct from the adjacent properties. Certainly to the, I hope I get my orientation right, to the southwest. Less incongruent with the structures to the northeast, but really that's the scale and the massing. I think you've identified probably the chief concern of the neighbors as we've been communicated. They're concerned by the city. In terms of where tenants come from, we're pretty data driven. The preliminary research we've done identifies a need for market rate non-student housing. Since this project is literally a year or two out from being built and being ready to be available to the marketplace, we couldn't identify specifically where those leads would come from, because most renters operate in more of a 60 to 120 day timetable as planning and executing a move. But we're comfortable with the current data that exists that indicates that there is a demand for this kind of product. That's why we're willing to take the investment risk on building it. Any additional follow-up there, Jamie, or certainly don't want to leave any sort of questions unaddressed, even if I don't have the answer, or it's an answer we don't particularly see eye to eye on. I want to make sure that we certainly have all the questions and doubts on your mind.
No, I think that's just one of the larger concerns I have is creating a very transient housing community where we're just now trying to establish another generation worth of residents in this area.
Yeah.
That are investing in single family dwellings and fixing those properties up.
Acknowledged. I do think it's a good question. It's a curious question as to where does for rent product make sense versus for sale product. Certainly, and I don't have the answer to that. I'm just saying it's an interesting question to think about. Most communities thrive when both exist. It's not everybody. I think we all intuit is in the market to buy a home, as in not everybody is in the market to rent an apartment either. So there needs to be a balanced mix. The perspective on that is distorted a bit because Lexington in part is a college town. So the student housing aspect sort of creates a distortion effect as to how to answer that question. That's almost a separate market. Certainly student housing, as we've said repeatedly, is not our target here. So if we can remove that from the equation and analyze Lexington as to what makes sense from an ownership versus rental product perspective, I think that's a fair discussion. And I think that is something that certainly is above our pay grade to answer. That really goes back to sort of comprehensive planning and whether or not the city staff and city elected officials see value in having from their perspective, a reasonable amount of available rental housing to supplement the market. And the fact remains that, when employers recruit, particularly, when they recruit new employees, those new employees rarely are looking to commit to an area in the terms of buying a house. They want to sort of check out the job and check out the community. And that requires having some product available for them to do that. So what that balance is I think open to energetic debate. We just hope to be a small part of that. Okay, it's great questions from Jamie. And Jamie, there's no quota here, so you can certainly chime back in later or whenever you want. But certainly want to make sure everybody else feels just as comfortable to voice their questions or concerns or doubts or whatever you want to talk about. And if you don't feel comfortable vocalizing it, there's a chat box. I actually just opened it up because of the last community meeting. There was a lot of chat participation. If you want to type it in there, I'm happy to read that and try to answer them on the fly. If you feel more comfortable typing in your questions. Great question. I was just chatted. Thanks for doing that, by the way, about the parking allotted for each unit. The concern was living adjacent to the property. We want to ensure that each unit, they want to ensure that each unit has ample parking so that essentially there's not overflow onto the streets and creates street congestion. We wholeheartedly agree with that. We do think that that is, along with sort of the scale and massing, probably the biggest concern that's been raised to us up till now is how do we park this facility adequately? Here again, it's another question of balance. Typically, city zoning has, not quite, but I'm oversimplifying, a one size fits all approach to parking. Every rental unit equals X amount of parking. We prefer to take a more nuanced approach to that. We are deliberately constraining our unit mix, and also offering pedestrian and bicycle friendly amenities to hopefully we can be on the lighter side of parking demand. We don't think people are not going to have cars, but we do think they'll probably have fewer cars than if we were offering, say, 2, 3, or 4 bedroom, apartments. Really focused on studio 1 bedroom. You're talking about singles and occasional couples, and a smattering of 2 bedrooms in there, more heavy on the couples side. So we are working with the city to determine what the right parking mix is. And I think you saw from our rendering that we did pull the parking back into the site, really both away from the road, not only for the visual effect, but to frankly make it inconvenient for somebody to, say, park on the street or around the corner and then haul their groceries in and then go in the entrances to the building. So there's no accounting for all of human nature. People are sometimes going to do everything that we don't want them to do. So I'm not going to say there's never going to be encroachment onto the street in terms of parking, but through design and proper property management, our goal is to minimize that. Occasionally, maybe some kind of event where lots of people have lots of people over, there may be a spillover, just like in any single family neighborhood. If somebody's having a graduation party or a wedding reception, that neighborhood is going to be crowded that day. That's not entirely different in an apartment community, but we're hoping that's an exception rather than the rule. So we are working with city staff to adjust that and try to find the precise mix that makes sense there. I hope that answers the question a bit. And just to supplement that, we're working on another project in another part of the state where parking is equally tight. And we've been going through a lot of research where we have been essentially canvassing other apartment communities and talking to their property managers and trying to figure out where that right balance is. So we do plan to bring that data that we've been gathering for another project back to our rezoning application, so we can statistically try to make the case that a nuanced approach makes sense. Again, feel free to, vocalize or type in your questions. Don't want anybody to, hopefully we've at least communicated in these 4 community meetings that we're very approachable and want to be welcoming of any questions or doubts or even criticisms. We'd like to hear it all. Should this go forward, we are literally going to be neighbors. So we want you to be both comfortable with the project and with us, because the 3 gentlemen you're looking at are the owners of the project. So we want you to be kind of familiar with us and how we approach both neighbor dialogue and problem solving. Great question. Chatted to us. Have we been in contact with the Architectural Review Board? And is it too early in the design process for the visual conversations to begin? That's a great question. The short answer is no. We've not been in contact with the ARB. It is very much on the early side in terms of those facade kind of conversations. We're kind of excited to do that, but that requires us, of course, bringing forward a couple of concepts for them to review. I'd have to defer to the city staff whether or not the ARB has a role with this. I'm getting a negative nod from Arnie there. So I guess they don't have purview over the site, but regardless, city staff and certainly the planning commission as part of rezoning effort would be in an approval review mode in terms of facades. So that would occur, that design effort would occur after, assuming city council sees it in their best interest to approve this. That's after which we would kick off our design efforts and prepare for that application. Did I get most of that right, Arnie, in terms of rezoning? Okay, good. So, thank you for that question. A great question. Oh, and speaking of facades, the examples we showed you are just that, examples. Facades are within some reason, fairly flexible in terms of what can be implemented. So there are, frankly, a bewildering number of options. We'd be excited to get feedback as to what style and material preferences neighbors might have for this kind of project. There are some school of thoughts that you want this kind of project to, weave into existing materials in the neighborhood. There are other schools of thought that, a new construction in a different period of time over the current inventory should be distinct and in some ways incongruent, but yet harmonious with the neighborhood, something that stands out. So that's really for the architects to come up with. I'm happy to say I don't have much of a dog in that fight until it comes down to the budgeted cost for the materials. So within reason, there are a lot of very attractive facade styles and materials that can be used that I think, again, should involve some energetic dialogue with the neighbors because, should this go forward, they would see it and we want them to be as pleased as possible with it.
Can you speak a little bit about what's driving your decision for 150 units?
Great question, Jamie. The 150 units is really a number we put out there in terms of our initial financial model. Again, our approach to this is really one of trying to make sense of the site, not just geographically, seeing how things fit, not just architecturally, which most of that's deferred to the later planning commission and rezoning, but also financially. What we're trying to figure out is a business model. Just as one would approach any sort of business planning, what makes sense on that site. And while it is a tight site, we feel comparatively speaking, because of its geometry, that it should be able to accommodate that number of sites. That number of units, particularly with the unit mix that we have, advertised, sort of on the smaller end of the range. So obviously, if these are bigger units, in terms of unit types, there'll be fewer of them. But that's what's really pushing that number is the smaller unit type mix.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Just sort of related to that, we did see some discussion in prior community meetings and some of the responses back to the city staff about what we offered for the site. Any piece of real estate is going to be effectively worth different amounts for different business models. If somebody were going in there and proposing, I don't know, a movie theater, or maybe that's a bad example these days, but some kind of alternate product, the price point that could be offered would be different. We propose what we believe makes sense to the business model that we've crafted, trying to assess, frankly, the cost of the site work and the utility relocation and the demolition of the existing structures. So, there's been a fair amount of dialogue over whether or not the property is worth more or less, and the answer is yes. It's definitely worth more or less, depending on what one wants to do there. So, our intention was certainly to offer a fair market value per our assessment of its value based on our business model. If somebody were proposing, more units, it'd probably be worth more. Or a different business model entirely would have a different price point. So I just wanted to kind of address that point. Another item that was brought up in some of the responses was, can anybody put in a proposal? And I think I've mentioned this in other community meetings. We've offered what's called an unsolicited proposal to the city, meaning they didn't issue an RFP. They didn't ask us to do it, hence unsolicited. We offered it, and that gives the city really maximum flexibility. They can completely disregard it, they can shelve it, they can trash it, they can negotiate it, which is, that latter step is what they've, chosen to do at this point. But the city's under no obligation to accept or reject what we're doing. We've had a great dialogue with the city, and the point we've come to, I think, has been a better product because of that dialogue. But my point here is that because it's a city-owned piece of real estate, literally anybody can put in a proposal for consideration, just as we've done. We have no exclusive rights at this point. Now, should a purchase contract be approved by City Council, then we would have rights to purchase after a due diligence period.
So could you share, or have you determined what the cutoff point is for this to be fiscally viable for you if the city is to ask to lower the overall number of units or the size of the structure?
We have some internal discussion about that, Jamie. That's a great question. We don't have firm numbers at this point. We're still hoping that we can achieve 150 units or thereabouts there. If we're able to draw down from that a bit, it won't be by much. We're not talking about a big scale difference. The reality is that new construction is quite expensive. If anybody knows anything about construction, they know that particularly this last year, materials just sort of went off the roof in terms of pricing, and that trend has continued. And so there has to be sort of an economic yield in terms of product that's being produced at the end of it. Whilst 150 may not be the final number, it certainly needs to be in that realm to make sense. If somebody is hoping for 30 units or 50 units, I'm just not sure that the site makes sense in terms of what has to be done to make it ready for economically viable product.
Sure, thank you for clarifying.
No, you're welcome, and thank you for the questions. This would be an awfully quiet phone call without a lot of your questions. I have a couple of additional chatted questions. Will the developer consider roof shapes that can accommodate solar collector arrays? That's a great question. I think that's definitely on the table. We're going to be exploring a number of sort of green building options there, both in the site and in the buildings. It's something that we have tried to do in terms of our ethos as a development team over time. Again, that's really something that is a function of the design process when the architects get underway. But we would definitely like to explore that. And then another question, do you plan on landscaping the green space within your setbacks to help buffer the impact for single family residences that border the property, specifically the ones along Houston Street? As mentioned before, there are setbacks on the property. Our preference is to landscape those heavily. What can and cannot be done in those setbacks is certainly subject to current city code. But our preference would be to come up with a landscape package that, provides a really beautiful environment and also screening for the adjacent properties.
Yeah, we've talked about doing some fencing in there in addition to the landscaping.
There's really no opportunity to do, because it's not that big of a site, for any kind of berm or anything, any sort of earthwork kind of arrangement that might provide anything other than, as Randy mentioned, fencing and or plant-based screening.
Those are items we would offer up during the rezoning process as a proffer as a condition to the project.
But I do, not to work against my own purposes here, but I think we all just need to realize there's no way to screen that building. We certainly can create a buffer between the adjacent single family uses in there. That'll be quite beautiful. But certainly nothing that would screen the building itself.
Edwin, if there are no further questions, if I could just make a couple of comments more about process, in that there is a public hearing scheduled before City Council this Thursday, beginning at 7 p.m. And it's not the first item on, but it's, I believe, early on the agenda, somewhat early on the agenda. So for the folks listening, that is your next opportunity for this particular parcel to provide public input. We did receive, in response to the 75 letters that I delivered this past Monday, we received about a dozen comments or so, and those have been forwarded to Edwin and will be forwarded to City Council certainly prior to the meeting. David, I think you've already received half of those from Janie. And there'll be another batch coming for you. So those will be part of the public record. And just wanted to thank Randy and Edwin and Andy for being willing to sit in on another one of these Zoom presentations and willing to answer questions. This is the fourth out of the ones that we've held so far, and this one was specifically targeted to the neighbors, because I believe it was a comment from council, if I'm not mistaken, that we hadn't heard enough from adjacent property owners. So that's why we made the effort, and thank you all for being willing to sit in on one more of these sessions.
Yeah, and thank you, Arnie. And to supplement what he's saying, whether we have an official Zoom call sponsored by the city or not, we don't want this to be the end of the dialogue. Again, should City Council see it as appropriate for us to move forward, we, in some form or fashion, will be neighbors, and so we want to create a forum by which we can talk frequently. You all can share your concerns and ideas with us, and we can figure out a way to work together to have the best possible outcome here, both pre-construction, during construction, and then of course during operations. Our goal is to be great neighbors and be additive to the great neighborhood. So I think we're all pretty approachable. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, well, if not, again, thank you for your time. Just to echo Arnie's thoughts, that it's great. Community engagement is one of those things we try to do. If we want to err, we want to err on overdoing it. So this won't be the last dialogue. I'm hoping we can save this little Zoom group, with neighbors, so that we can, should we move forward, maybe it's just for monthly, weekly updates or something. We need to come up with some mechanism by which we can chat in a way that everybody can participate and feel open about, voicing their input. Thank you for your time today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.